Okay.
Hi, everybody. How are we doing?
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, everybody. Welcome, welcome. This is, as we talked about last week, in a sense, the secular calendar coincides with the parsha of the week, a new year, and a new book of the Torah. And in this, we pointed out, I think, an important thing, which is that this is not just a new book in the sense that with this we are starting a new chapter in the history of the Jewish people, but we will actually get away from a certain narrative that was the entire book of Genesis. And now, with the book of Shemot, really through the end of the Torah, we take a different narrative. And that is the first book is focused on the individuals that are the patriarchs and the matriarchs, the great notable figures, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah and his wife Nama, and their Shem, Ham, and Yefet, and then eventually Abraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov, Rachel and Leah, and the Shvatim, Yosef, etc., etc. And we very much focus on the dynamic of the individuals. As we say, as we've been saying tongue in cheek, we've been on the Abramowitz family, right? But now it's we moved on from the Abramoviches, and now we are focused not on individuals, but on the nation, on Klal Yisrael. Now you say, what do you mean? We are still focused on individual. We talk about Moshe, right? So this whole parsha really is a discussion about Moshe's first his self discovery. First it goes even before, right? The drama that is leading up to Moshe's birth, with the threat that exists against all of the Jewish boys, the decree, etc., etc. Then Moshe's birth and throwing him into a basket, and then he's found by Patya, and then he's raised in the Pharaoh's house, and then he goes on and he discovers his roots, as it were, and he stands up in defense of his brethren, the Jewish people, raises Pharaoh's ire. He has to go around to Midian, and Midian he has the burning bush encounter, etc., etc. So you say, well, it's still very much on an individual. In fact, we've introduced the individual we will be talking the most about. So, Rabbi, I disagree with your perspective that we've stopped talking about individuals and we're talking about a nation. To which I say, Sandy, stop talking to yourself. But having said that, uh, uh, um, let's answer the question, which is that we are talking about Moshe not as an individual, but as a leader of the people. And the proof is that we basically do not have any conversations between him and his wife Zipporah. And how much dialogue do we have of his two sons, Gershom and Elazar? Zero. Zero.
No.
You beat me to it. I was about to say that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Sandy, you just spoke more than Gershom and Elazar speak in the entire Torah. Right? Right? They say the old joke that the kid comes home from religious school and somebody says, "Mom," and he says, "I got there's a very great news. I got a role in the play." And the mom says, "Oh, that's very exciting." What says that of I get to be the Jewish husband. So mom says, "Go tell your teacher you want a speaking role." You know, so in this, it's like if you come and said, I got the role of being the sons of Moshe himself, right? The son of Moshe himself, right? Who would think that that would not be a speaking role at all, right? We have dialogues of Bilam and Balak and right and all these, and yet, because ultimately we are done focusing on families, even Moshe's family, and we are talking about the nation. Now, I think there's a very powerful point to be made in that on the one hand, people like Genesis because in Genesis it talks about individuals, and you can find yourself in these individuals, right? In their successes, in their failures, in their character traits, etc., etc. And I say, if you're zooming out and you're focusing on a nation, that takes away the opportunity for me to feel myself in the story. To which the response is actually the opposite. Because Genesis, we were not talking about you. We were talking about your grandpa and your grandma. Truly great people that you have a little bit of an excuse of saying, I'm never going to be them. I'm never going to be. The lessons are all very good, and I can aspire and to try to learn and assimilate some of this into what I can do, et cetera, et cetera. But to a certain degree, it's not my story. It's a story of my very illustrious parentage. But the rest of the Torah talks about the Jewish people. And guess who's a member of the Jewish people? You.
Us. You.
Us, right? And that actually makes, from Shemot onward, more personal. Because while we are talking about a nation instead of individuals, and that doesn't sound very personal, but guess who's part of that nation? You are. When we're discussing about Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, there's a little bit of an issue, which many people, look, we all do it and say, yeah, that's great for Avraham and Yitzchak or Yaakov, right? That level of sacrifice, that level of commitment, that level of righteousness, whatever it is. But I'm Joe Schmo. Well, guess what? Starting from Shmos, God is talking to Joe Schmo. In fact, he's talking about Joe Schmot. Sorry, the pun lent itself. I am a dad 10 times over. I am allowed 10 times over to say dad jokes. So you have to bear with me. But so this leads us into
But I'm not.
Parshat. Say again.
I'm forbidden from saying those jokes in this household.
I was going to say, well, you see, I as of yet, my daughter has not become a teenager and beyond, so I can still get away with dad jokes. We'll see once Zlata becomes a teenager, what she will let me do and get away with. But either way, Parshat Shemot is very much, we embark on our story. And this is the point of the Haggadah, that the story we are reading about is not a story that occurred 3,000 years ago that has reverberations till this very day. If you're reading this story of Shemot and the story of Exodus, the slavery and the liberation, etc., as a story that occurred so long ago, but still maintains some element of relevancy to this day and age, then you're reading the Haggadah wrong. And we make that point at the very beginning of the Haggadah, when the child asks the Manishtana. We respond with the words that Ilu lahotzi evadim hayinu l'farbe Mitzrayim yotzienu Hashem yel chazak v'ilu lahotzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu tavatenu v'Mitzrayim hari anu uvenenu uvenei vanenu meshubadim hayinu l'paro b'Mitzrayim. What does this mean? That if God had not taken 3,000 years ago, our ancestors out of Egypt, then we, our children, and our children's children would still be enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. Now, that's a remarkably hard thing to sell a child on. Sorry. Why? Not because they'd be cynical, not because they'd be lacking nuance, because you just made a statement that is factually, historically impossible. You engage in hyperbole. You're trying to connect the child to the story, and straight out of the gate, you say something entirely bombastic that is not true. The child would be totally not at fault for saying, "Okay, you lost me. You lost me. We'd still be slaves, not only us, our children, to Pharaoh in Egypt. When was the last time anybody saw a Pharaoh? And when was the last time Egypt was a superpower? We'd still be slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. Oh, not only you, your children and your children's children." Like, okay. And that's our entree into telling the whole story. Straight from the get-go, we are making a point that is factually inaccurate. And And then and this night, what's most crucial, we are obligated in quadruplicate to connect the child to the story. Connect, not just teach the story, not just tell the story. We don't call it Sipur Mitzrayim. We don't call the book the Sipur Shal Pesach. We don't call it the Ma'amar Shal Pesach or Diburim Shal Pesach. We call it the Haggadah Shal Pesach because the Torah tells us Vihigadeta Levincha, right? And telling the story is not enough. It's not lesaper. It's not lemor. It's not ledaber. It's lehagid. And the word hagid, as we talk about often, what other word do we know? What company do we all know very well? Israel, one of the big companies that we all know so well in Israel. Eged, right? Eged, because Eged means connection. Lehagid means to not just tell the story, but to connect the child to the story. And straight from the get-go, you're making a point that would honestly be a turnoff. Nowadays, most children are not nuanced enough to think and pay attention. They're like already the Seder. Okay, we're doing the Seder. Yeah, so we're going to eat the matzah. We're going to drink the wine. We're going to, we're going to watch our uncle get drunk because he drank too much wine, and he's going to do something at the table. We're going to argue about whether charoset is delicious or not, et cetera, et cetera. I'm being a little facetious. What I'm saying is that let's say we had a child who was truly sensitive and was hearing you out, and you made that point, they would say, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. And if you're saying that's the whole reason I should be sitting here because we would still be slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, then you've actually just undid your case. So rather, the understanding in this is obviously very simple but very profound. 210 years of slavery without any light at the end of the tunnel, God not coming out. Then eventually maybe we would have broken out, maybe the country would have been dissolved, Egypt would have been dissolved. History happens. But we would still to this day be enslaved to Egypt as what happened with the Babylonians and the Persians and the Greeks and any other nation that was captured by another nation. They weren't wiped out to a man, but there are no more Babylonians left. Why? Because they just assimilated and became dissolved as a nation, dissolved as a unique identity, and they just became whatever nation it was that they were absorbed by, as we see with our own foray into slavery, that the black population, even after liberated, are still very much Americans. They are beholden to this culture. Their names are not Mobutu. Their names are Reggie Jackson, and they serve the religion of the land, and their sensibilities are the sensibilities of the land. They speak English. Many of them have never been back to Africa, never have a desire to go back to Africa because they're Americans. Had God not taken us out, we would be Egyptians. We'd be Egyptians in names and cultures, etc., etc. And that's what makes it our story. Yeah, yes, Andy, go ahead.
Just off to the side a bit, what's the gematria in regards to 210 versus the 400 and the such? If you don't mind speaking to that, over.
Yes, and so I'll mention it briefly. I mean, it's a long conversation because there's multiple explanations. The fact is that God told Abraham that your children will be slaves for 400 years. Ultimately, we do the count, and it's not 400 years; it's 210, which actually, as you said, is gematria of Redu Shama. You will go down over there, which is Redu is the gematria of 210. Resh is 2 is 200. Dalet is 4. Avav is 6, 210. And the understanding was that it actually started earlier. One is that the angels prayed and asked that 190 years be removed. Others say that it really started from the moment that Yaakov, in a sense, already from some say the count goes from his birth or from when he went down to Egypt, not when he went down to Egypt, but when he was born, or the trials and the tribulations begins with Yosef. But the understanding is that the count started earlier, and as a reprieve, Hashem did not have it begin with slavery, but rather the process that eventually led to the slavery, eventually led to the liberation, began. But the actual years of slavery was 210 years. So the preparatory process that will eventually lead to it was started earlier, but for the first 190 years, and then was 210 years of actual slavery. So yes, your point is noted that it's 210 and not 400. But having said that, backing up to the principle that, and we are making this point to the child at the Seder, because is fine. I hear. So we would have been Egyptian. Okay. Why is that such an important detail right now in our celebrating of Pesach? Are you saying that I should be even more grateful? So I should, when I pick up the cup of wine and I thank God for taking us out, I should really, really, really mean it? Is that what we're trying to say? No. We're trying to say that when we read the Haggadah, we're not reading their story, we're reading your story. Tonight, we're not celebrating an event that occurred, we're celebrating something that is occurring. From Shemot to the end of the Torah, the story is ours, the lesson is ours. And that has to be, to a certain degree, what each and every one of us does when we study this part. And it says the Jewish people did this, and the Jewish people were instructed to do that, and the Jewish people had their success and their failure. You're the Jewish people. It wasn't the Hebrews. It wasn't, you should not be picturing in your mind some ancient people wearing robes somewhere in the desert, somewhere that might as well be aliens from Mars in terms of how much you feel connected to them. You put your face there. That's you. This is your story. This is your bout with slavery and your liberation. And we pointed out, we'll say this briefly because we have talked about this in the past, but it follows in this narrative, that is why the Torah chose, or why Yiddishkeit rather, chose to call this book of the Torah by a very boring and seemingly non sequitur, but a name that is in no way connected with the actual theme. In the world, we call this the book of Exodus. It's a very dramatic word, and it's a very accurate word, because this is the story of the Exodus, and it is a dramatic story, and so it has a very fitting name. And we call it Shemot. Why do we call it Shemot? Well, you can say because the first parsha of the book is Shemot, and that's the process we do. The first parsha names the book, right? Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra. Okay, so why is the first parsha named Shemot? Well, because it's the first distinguishable word.
Right.
Right. You have Ve'ela. You're not going to call a parsha Ve'ela. Ve'ela means and these. That's too common of a word. So you pick the first kind of distinguishable Shemot. Okay, Shemot. Ve'ela Shemot is the second word. Sometimes it's the first word. Sometimes it's the second word. Sometimes it's the fifth word. If the beginning words are Ve'edaber Hashem Moshe Lemar, fine. So you could say that if you really want to be a boring fuddy-duddy. But if you understand that everything in Torah is exact, then there's a specific reason that we chose to call this book the book that speaks about the great liberation and the advent of the Jewish people by the name Shemot, which means names. Why? Because this is our story, not just then, but now. And ultimately, as much as we are going on this at Pesach to acknowledge that we would not have been freed and we would not be who we are today if God had not come and taken us out, right? Ilu lahotzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is why the Seder night it's all about us acknowledging God, right? It's a night of gratitude to the Holy One. 4 cups of wine, we toast him 4 times. But equally, we drive home the point, right? And by the way, and we make that point that wasn't only just then, but rather the Hisha Amda Lavutenu Vilano, right? Shelo Echa Bilvad Amad Aleinu L'Chalatel El Shel B'Chol Dover Omdim Aleinu L'Chalatel VaKadosh Baruch Hu Matzilenu Mi'Adam. God, this is also our story. You're always there, having our back, always saving us from all the terrible threats that we face, right? Including including today, right? And unfortunately, it's all the more necessary to talk about. Yes, Paula.
And that's the shot of Shemot, and it's wonderful, and we need to know it. I'm just thinking about going a little bit beyond that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you just fine.
Oh, okay. New computer. It's a long story. What I'm thinking is, I grew up believing that Yetziat Mitzrayim was the beginning of Geula. I don't think that's true anymore. And part of that is something that you taught us about the meaning of the word partnership. And just as you just said a few minutes ago, that the years of slavery were 210, but we were in Egypt before that, and that was the lead up. I want to suggest that the lead up to the beginning of Geula isn't going to happen, believe it or not, till after Har Sinai. What if it happens when we are building that Mishkan? And and in a way that never happened before, the Shekhinah descends. We become part of that Merkab, the chariot that carries the message along. It doesn't happen till then. I'm just thinking lately that all of this is a lead up to that moment where that partnership becomes solidified, and that's what we carry on. That's why there can be a Galut Yavan within Israel. You know, the Greek, it all happened within Israel. Because it's not about being liberated from a country or thrown out of a country or being in a different country or even being in Israel. It's being that chariot in that active partnership with Hashem.
So beautiful. In
Unpack.
fact, yeah. So let me unpack that and actually say that that's actually what Shemot is part of what I mean by Shemot. Because if anything, that does not explain Shemot. What I was saying up until now, what you're saying, what you're touching on, it does. What I was saying is that Shemot, the word Shemot, is names. It's not God's names. It's not a reference to God's names. God taking us out when we need him to is only half of the story. Indeed, it's only half of the partnership, as you just finished saying, Paul. Shemot shines a light. And by the way, that's the name Exodus. Exodus would be that this is God's moment that he pulled us out. He exuded us. Right? I guess that's how you would say it. Right? But that would shift the focus on that aspect, on that part of it. And no doubt it's a very important part. But the Torah is our instruction manual. And there's a more important side of the partnership. Not it's more important, but it's more important that we focus on. Because just as important that even the Hotzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if God had not taken us out then, and God had not taken us out to all these other things, we would never survive the situation. There's another truth to it. There's another crucial and vital ingredient. If we had to be a nation to take out. 210 years later, God could show up and say, okay, I'm here to take you out. Where are they? Oh, they're gone. They're totally assimilated. There's no definable. Eila Shemot b'nei Yisrael. These are the names of the Jewish people. Haba'im Mitzrayim, that go down into Egypt. Reuven, Shimon, the Levi. Right? Commentaries say this follows. Bereuven v'Shimon v'Levi nachtin, Aramaic, ubereuven Shimon v'Levi salkin. They went down into Egypt with the names Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, and they came out of Egypt still with the names Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. To a certain degree, even though we had sunk to the 49th level, and Paul, I'm going to get to the Torah and building the Mishkan in a moment. But the Shemot shines the light on our responsibility in this perpetual journey we're on. That God will do his part. Well, we have to do our part. We have to remember who we are. We have to preserve who we are. We have to keep our identity. We have to stay true to it, no matter if we spend 210 years in slavery. We still need to come out on the other end of it, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. And that, one can argue, is an even greater feat than God. For God, miracles, no sweat. The fact that human beings somehow managed 210 years of slavery and they come out on the other side, and their names are not Akhenaten or Tutankhamun or whatever it is, but their names are still Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Until this very day, our names are Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Why? Because we heard the message in calling this book Shemot. And we have held true to it. We've held true to this side of the partnership. For better or for worse, sometimes better and sometimes worse, right? Let's all acknowledge it hasn't been smooth sailing. One could say, God, you haven't either done smooth, it hasn't been smooth on your side either. I'm saying that emotionally, not intellectually. Of course, intellectually, everything Hashem does is right and perfect, etc., etc. But emotionally, every once in a while, we feel like Hashem could have done a little bit better, right? But honestly, I don't have the spiritual capital to say that. You know, there are other great sages that have, and I'm just paraphrasing for them. But the point being that it is a remarkable thing. It is a truly remarkable thing, and it speaks to, as Paul says, that shifts our focus onto our side of the ledger and to what it is that we need to be doing. That is why the very first thing that Yaakov did before coming down to Egypt was at Yehuda Shalach Lefanav, right? The Lefanav Goshen. He sent Yehuda down first to establish a yeshiva because we're going to be here for a while. And if we're just going to say, and we're going to rely on yeah, and I'm sorry, I might get a little controversial here. Yeah, sure. Well, we'll wave an Israeli flag on Yom HaAtzmaut, and we'll have Knei Dalach in the chicken soup. And you ain't surviving a generation.
That's it.
You have to understand the responsibility of the partnership. You have to devote yourself, devote your children to it, teach them, double down, understand that when you're sitting at the Seder, this is what you're telling your child. The golden legacy and golden responsibility you have, because we're only here because the generation that before me made sure that their kids sat at the Seder and made sure that when they were at their Seder, they were ensuring that when their children would become adults, they would sit with their children down at the Seder. And it's very easy to disappear. And it won't even take some genocidal maniac. It will just take one generation that is ambivalent enough to not sit their family down at a Seder. Or sit down at a Seder and tell them that this is a night of, because you'll forgive me, but I'm going to launch, if I've already waded my way into some controversial language, I'm not the kind of person that gets all, I'm not the one who writes letters to the editor or writes long-winded comments on articles and papers or call people up. But I read an article, and you've heard me share this, but I'll say it again because it is apropos. the daughter of Abraham Joshua Heschel, when this whole thing, when gay marriage was the hot topic in the United States, wrote an article saying, by the way, I am the source for the orange on the Seder plate, and it has nothing to do with what they said at that point was, what were they saying? Women's rights, because the story, as it were, was that some rabbi said that women belong on the bima like an orange belongs on the Seder plate, so it became like you put an orange on the Seder plate as an element of feminism. She says, I will tell you, I'm the one who started the Seder, the orange on the Seder plate, and it was for this very worthy cause that finally America is catching up to me, and it's for gay rights, because ultimately an orange is sweet and you have to spit out the pits because the pits are unbending and the kernels of hate. And that's why I said you put an orange on the Seder plate, a whole long article about why, and patting herself on the back that she was ahead of her time in this cause. And I was livid. Not even because I had a problem with her cause, because the temerity. For 3,000 years, we did not dare touch this, because the anchor of Jewish tradition has been the Seder night, has been Pesach. And the anchor of the Seder night is the Seder plate. And for 3,000 years, nobody dared touch it, because they understood that if you don't preserve something intact in its original form, etc., then you become an anchor and unmoored. And I wrote to her, since when does the Seder plate have anything to do with your causes? Why, on this night when we're trying to do something so crucial, something that has never been achieved ever in history, preserving and perpetuating a heritage despite hell or high water for thousands of years, and the thing that has done it, nobody dared touch this. And you, with all your genius and all whatever, felt that this was the thing that you had to mess with because you had a cause. You had a cause that you felt was worthy enough. I said, so I wrote, and what happens if somebody then says, let's put a marshmallow for the cause of bullying, or a piece of coal for global warming onto the Seder plate of causes? And soon the Seder plate of causes is getting a little too crowded. So let's then remove the shank bone or the egg. And one generation later, the Seder night is unfamiliar. And because people have other causes and causes come and go, you have taken the anchor of Judaism and you had the chutzpah to do that which nobody else had done. You are messing with the roots because of your short-sighted and honestly sensationalist attitude. And I remember that many people were like, oh, it's just the orange. Well, then nobody's going to sit there and recreate the whole Seder plate. Guys, like, relax. She just wants to add one thing for a cause that she feels is worthy. Google now on YouTube how to make a millennial Seder plate. And I have to say that I was prescient, because not only did I nail that they were going to add a whole bunch of things, I almost nailed half the stuff they were going to add. You have this for global warming, and you have this for that, and it's like, because for all the causes, all started because of this thing. And by the way, half of the old stuff is missing because there's only room for just so many stuff. This is the mistake. Yiddishkeit does not need to be updated because it is our story here and now.
Look, Sudi and I left an entire movement because of this. So we're with you.
But I'm saying, really, all of us should have this understanding. We need to remind everybody that this is not, what's it called? This is not an opinion or a radical. This is obvious. This is obvious. And if we take a moment to get away just from our own need, and understand, what does it mean to be a Yid? What does it mean to be a Jew? What is the legacy of the Jewish people throughout the ages? What is it that Yaakov sent Yehuda down It says we're going to survive for 210 years. We need to have that center that reminds us who we are. And that is our Torah. And calling this Parsha Shemot and demanding of us that you got to study this every day of the week, of every week of your lives, for your entire life, and teach your children to study this. This is not Baruch Atah Hashem Natan HaTorah, the God who gave us the Torah. Baruch Atah Hashem Notain, the one who is giving us, in the present tense, the Torah. The Shemot is our names. It's not their names, it's our names, the names that we still name our children, the heritage that the language that we still speak, the values and the Torah that the partnership that we are still in with God. That's Yiddishkeit. That's Torah. That's the story. Yes, Andy.
When is the first reference to Zion in the Torah?
Zion as what? The land? The land?
Yes, because that's. I mean, I don't see how you can be Jewish and not about Zion. I mean, because it's so frequently mentioned, but I don't remember when it is first.
Oh, the very first thing is obviously Lech Lecha, Abraham's Lech Lecha, right?
Oh,
leave
okay.
and go to the land, right? To the land. But having said that, we have to understand, because this is something I think that Paula was referencing as well. The land is not what makes us Jewish. The land is where we can be the best Jews. But we have to understand that the vast majority of our existence has been outside the land. And that's not just as a punishment, it's because we have work to do. So I absolutely agree with you, and I think you would be hard-pressed to find somebody who was more in love with the land of Israel than the Rebbe, more devoted to speaking more regularly to the leaders, reading 7 periodicals a day from the Holy Land to be abreast of everything that was going on, did more by the measure of those involved in the Israeli government than any rabbi in his day, as it were, for the land of Israel, etc. And yet the Rebbe never stepped foot into the land of Israel.
I think that's very important. What you said during the Darash, that the Rebbe took that from Joseph.
Correct. In other words, my point is that, of course, we have a absolutely symbiotic relationship with the Holy Land, right? And ultimately, is where the whole, right, leaving Egypt was not just to leave Egypt. Leaving Egypt was to get to the Holy Land. But we have to also remember that for many people, having an association and an affiliation with the land, with Israel, in whatever form it is, eating a falafel in Tel Aviv is them being Jewish. Let me make it very clear. Eating a falafel in Tel Aviv is a very delicious pastime. And thank you for helping support a Jewish vendor in Tel Aviv. It's not what makes you Jewish. And it's unfortunate that too many of the birthright trips make sure that we go eat the falafel in Tel Aviv and actually never go to the Kotel. Because, and with that, as they say, Iker hatirutz chaser min sefer. The main answer is missing from the equation. If you go and have a falafel in Tel Aviv and you never step foot in, and you don't put your hand on the kotel and explain why, and it's not either about the kotel, it's not either about the city or environs of Jerusalem. It's about what the Beit HaMikdash is, and as Paula pointed out, it is the focal point of our partnership with God. That's what it is to be a Jew. The best place you could do it, and the best place that drives that home, is the Holy Land. But ultimately, unfortunately, we see so many Jews living in Israel that are lost in their own identity. And being in Israel itself is not enough. It's what you do and how you see yourself in the Holy Land. So by all means, we will celebrate every single person who makes Aliyah, and more and more should. But crucially, it's our role to teach them not just to love Israel, but to what to love about Israel. And if you're going to go to Israel, but you're leaving the Torah behind, then again, you've left out the main principle of the equation. 1 second. Yes, go ahead, Julian.
Quick question.
Sure.
You
No,
mentioned the
it
chutzpah.
could be
No,
longer than a
little.
quick question. Go ahead.
It's short, but it probably will take the rest of the year to answer it, to address it. To what extent isn't the bottom problem behind any chutzpah, behind putting orange or anything else, the fact that there really is a loss of belief in God?
Without a doubt. When and a loss of belief in God, and then a loss with that comes then also a lack of respect of what the Torah is. Oh,
Yeah.
this is a great work of brilliant sages, and so we pay attention to it when it seems to say make a good point. But maybe when it seems to not jive with our current sensibilities or whatever it is, we can ignore it at our leisure, and we can opine away from it. And what we can do is we can then shepherd Judaism in a direction that may not be compatible with with Torah values, et cetera, et cetera. But is, as we see, all that stems from what you said, which is and there's two words. It's interesting. The word emunah, right? Anybody know how you say? Because many people say, "Yeah, sure, I believe in God." Well, I'm sure if you would ask the daughter of Rabbi Joshua Heschel if she believes in God, she would probably say, "Yeah, of course I believe in God." But you know what's interesting about the word emunah? Anybody know the word for training in Hebrew? Imunim. Because inherent in the concept of emunah is that it's not a one or done thing. It's not you flip the switch. Sure, I have emunah done. Oh, does it take training? Oh, does it take constant work? Exercise. Emunah is an exercise. It is a constant effort that you need to hone, and that will lapse and get fat without proper or atrophy, rather, better than fat, will atrophy without regular honing, without spending time to learn, to study, to contemplate. Like any relationship, you can say, "Oh, I love you" at the day of the marriage, and then never again think or contemplate or express that again, and say, "Yeah, I said it at the day of the marriage, and I never." I will let you know if I changed. If I will come back to you. So don't worry, it's still the default setting until I tell you otherwise. I said I love you. The day of the marriage. Yeah, I believe in God. When was the last time you thought about him? When was the last time you thought about your relationship with him? Voluntarily. Right? Not because you were caught in some terrible circumstance and you said, "Oh, God." No, but we actually didn't take advantage of the relationship, but you actually invested in the relationship. And I think, Sandy, that is one of the places that Israel helps, without a doubt. Israel has a holiness to it that God is a little bit closer to the surface. And so the relationship with God is easier, in a sense, to feel when you're in the Holy Land, without a doubt. But that also makes those that are like on a mission to not connect with God, almost they become more vociferous in Israel, right? Because it's like they have to fight. They have to fight the develop very strong muscles to stand against the tide. As it were. Yeah. By the way, there's something, it's interesting. Do you know that there's something called Jerusalem syndrome?
Sure.
Fascinating.
Sure.
Google this. That people feel a kind of spiritual intensity that they cannot handle. You know who never feels Jerusalem syndrome? Jews. They don't feel, people around the world express a sense of anxiety and like pressure and like, and most Jews, they walk into Jerusalem like, home. Yeah, sorry. Over the frequency is not dialed into you. Sorry, it's dialed in. It's dialed into. Yeah, so for you, the frequency is jarring. For us, the frequency feels perfect. Right? You gotta be open for the frequency. You gotta be turned on to the frequency. You gotta be searching the channels to catch the frequency, as it were. But you see, that's something else. Somebody just shared this with me yesterday. It's not all is lost, and they're not trying to come across with a negative and be one of those that's just sitting there and waving his fist and his stick. Somebody else pointed out something interesting. The word in Hebrew for the irreligious is what? What do we call an irreligious person in Israel?
Hiloni.
Hiloni.
Hiloni?
What's the word for window?
Cholon.
Salon. Hiloni is just, there's a window, there's an opportunity. If you can just sometimes you gotta climb in through the window. Like you gotta. It's there. The chalon is there. It's not like an opaque circumstance. Every single chiloni has a chalon open. You just got to find it and walk through it, or whatever it is, project through it. Point is that this is what the Torah is reminding us here. The night of the Seder and the stories that we are reading here is not to sit back and enjoy as we tell a story of our ancient forebears who God did something amazing for them, and we will be grateful and we will feel its reverberations till this day. There'll be a takeaway. We'll make sure that every single one of us has the goodie bag on our way out the door from the parsha. We're like, oh, I'll take away a little something, a little souvenir from the parsha, some good tidbit or some nugget that this parsha will give me.
Really good. She really likes it.
You're reading it wrong.
Yeah.
This is not a story. It's not God's moment for our forebears from long ago. This is our story now. Shemot. Do you carry the name Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Sarah, Rachel, Esther, etc., etc.? Then understand that the Torah is talking to you, and that you got to talk to the Torah. This is the continued partnership. And Paula, ultimately, and I want to make one other point, a point that I have made again, but again, we're folding these things into the context of what we're talking about now. In this parsha, there's a moment where Moshe encounters a very strange phenomenon, a metaphysical phenomenon, right? A bush that is burning and is not being consumed. Now, many people focus on what the message of a burning bush that's not being consumed. Oh, the Jewish people can sometimes get burned, but they're not consumed. The bush was a thorn bush, which is what most people leave out. It's very important. The word snez, not the Hebrew word for bush. It's the Hebrew word for a specific type of bush, for a thorn bush. Because a thorn bush, as any kid who ever threw a frisbee or anything into such a thorn bush will tell you, it's very easy to get your hand in there, right? You're looking like, oh God, a thorn bush. It's like, okay, I have no choice. Just get the frisbee out. You stick your hand in, you grab the frisbee, like, oh, that wasn't so bad. And then you start pulling out, and you're like, uh-oh. Right? It's like, uh-oh. Right? Like the Jewish people slid into Egypt very easily. And we also can slip into the clutches of the Yetzer Hara very easily, because it has all the fine words and all the things and all the validations and justifications. But the next thing you know, you're farchapt, as they say, right? You're caught, you're captured, right? So Hashem is saying, I'm here. And I know, and I acknowledge this was a thorn bush. It wasn't easy. It's a lot easier to get stuck in than it is to pull out, but that's why I'm here. Etc. All those connotations. But I pointed out something I think is fascinating. I don't see a lot written on it. But if you will look at the language, 3 times It is remarked upon in the parsha that Moshe turned to see this. And it says, and Moshe turned to see that this bush was burning. And he said, let me turn to see this bush that is burning. And God saw that Moshe turned to see this burning bush. And then he said to him, Moshe, Moshe, right? So why is this such an important bit of information that Moshe turned to see it? I mean, like he was walking through a desert and there's a bush on fire. Most people's natural reaction would be to turn to see it. But the Torah is saying actually an important point. How many times is it very clear to us that there is a message in this moment, but because we don't want to hear the message, we don't want to be beholden to the responsibility that this message has for us, we pretend we don't see it. It's like that, the red light beeping on the phone. You pick up the phone and you see who's calling and it's a rabbi, right? And it's 6:45 in the morning and you're like, oh, I don't want to answer this. I know why he's calling, right?
Oh, wait a minute there. I pick up the phone.
Right. No, you're Sandy. You see, in this we should all be Moshe. But I'm saying, right? Moshe could have said, you know what? I got out of Egypt. It was rough. I made it out. I'm starting a family here. It's serene. It's peaceful. I'm a shepherd. It's good. A burning bush is going to, whatever it's going to disrupt what I'm doing. And Moshe says, nope, I got to go see. Because that's the way we have to live life. We have to live life as people on a mission, people as part of a partnership. It's not our role to survive and enjoy. We're in a partnership with Hashem. Right? Vayomer Moshe, Moshe. And God said, Moshe, Moshe. And Moshe says,
Hineni.
Hineni. That's us. This is our parsha. This is our message. We're navigating a world right now, etc., etc. And it's hard to be a Jew. It's hard to preserve. It's hard to teach others. It's hard. Vayomer Moshe, Moshe, Vayomer Hineni. And God's not talking to that Moshe. He's talking to this Moshe. Why? Because Shemot. Because we carry that name. Because yes, it is about God pulling us out from an impossible situation. But it's also about the fact that we were there 210 years later to be pulled out. And that there was, as God says, I pull you out and I know that you will be the ones who will serve me. And we have ups and downs, but we have. And going forward, wherever it is, in good times and in bad, the answer is still Hineni. And that is what makes us not slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. That is what makes us not slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. That partnership we have with Hashem. Hashem's part in it and our part in it. That's what we celebrate on Pesach. And so for the next, this is, in a sense, a preface as we go through this, through the book of Shemot. It will really be a shift. We're not going to talk about what we can learn from Abraham or what we can learn from Yitzchak or what we can learn from Sarah or Leah or Rachel. The narrative changes. Now it's, what is Hashem telling us directly? Yes, Juliana.
Again, I'll make it short. It's so late. The names. Isn't it even deeper than the names as such, but what the names mean? Because so often Jews have had to change their names or have wanted to change their names, but it was for the surface. Similarly, God's name is whatever. I mean, there is something beyond the name. And the fact that, like my grandfather was a Levi, I just recently found that out. Wow. I mean, and so as far as I'm concerned, and so that's what matters. And there are people who, when I sometimes see some of these Jews called Levi and Cohen, who say things that hurt the Jewish people, it's not just it's behind.
100%. A name is not about the name. It's not about what I mean to say is, look, I'm going on about the name, and my name is Alexander Sender. It's about the farthest you get from a biblical name, unless you say Alexander the Great is biblical. But my point is, I am very proud of this message, even though my name is nowhere near a Reuven, Shimon, or a Levi, or a Yehuda, or whatever it is. It's what a name means. It's the principle of it, which is that whether you actually name your child Reuven, Shimon, or Levi, or you uphold the heritage that is recognizable to the original Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. I say this, I'm finished on this, and you've heard this a million times from me, but this will be it's always nice to say it, and always whatever it is. It says, this is what I tell bar and bat mitzvah boys in that oldest class, right? I say a thought experiment. Socrates walks through a wormhole, right? Ends up in modern day Greece, right? Boom, goes from where he is, and the next thing he knows, he's in modern day Greece. Same place, but it's now 2,000 years later. Noise, cars, planes, totally confused. Grabs the first person he sees and says, and starts speaking to him in ancient Greek. To which the guy's like, right? Then they find a way to communicate. And he says, my name is Socrates. And the guy looks and says, who in the world names their kid Socrates nowadays? Well, Theodopolis or whatever it is. It's like, who names a kid Socrates? And then he says, can you point me to the local temple of Zeus? And the guy's going to say, buddy, what millennium are you from? Right? Now, imagine Moshe Rabbeinu walks through a wormhole and ends up in modern day Jerusalem. So first of all, the cacophony, the noise, the Egged bus drivers yelling at the taxi drivers or whatever it is, and he looks and says, my people. Right? No, just kidding. But either way, then in the ancient language that Moshe spoke 1,000 years before Socrates, he turns to this person and he says, Shalom Aleichem. To which the person responds, Aleichem Shalom. This is still the language we speak. And then he says in that language, Shem Shali Moshe. My name is Moshe. To which the guy says, Shem Shali Gam Moshe. My name is also Moshe. Get original. Come on, get creative. Like everybody's named Moshe here. And then he says, tell me, where can we go serve God? He says, well, I'm going from Mincha. We could probably use you for a minyan. Come. That's what it means, Shemot. It's not whether you have the exact name, etc., etc. It's the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu could go through a wormhole and end up in modern day Israel, and he would recognize Judaism. He would recognize it. They didn't wear black hats then, or strimals. That's not the point. The mitzvahs are still being kept. The name of the church, his name is still the most popular name, even not only among Jews, among non-Jews. David and Jonathan, whatever it is, we preserved our culture. In fact, the world has adopted it from us, which is kind of the point. Ultimately, we have very much beautifully held up our end of this as a nation up until now, and we've got a lot more to do. And now the ball's in our court. But that's the parsha. That's how we read the parsha. That is why straight from the outset, Eila Shemot, right? The parsha didn't need to begin with those words. We already know who are the children from Edom. We just said it last parsha. But we're saying this whole story of the Exodus, it only is because they went down with these names and they're going to leave with these names. Yes, Andy.
Yeah, I want to go back to Bereshit. And I like the primer on Shemot, but going back to Bereshit, the Jacob's blessings to his children, and especially Shimon, Shimon, and I forgot the other one.
Levi.
Yeah, and basically later in the history, the tribes go against those two. And then I've read other things in my studies years ago that I can't quote to you about their territories or their areas being considered lawless or things like that. But yet there are still people who are named Simon, So yes, I get the biblical name, but I have a bit of a I don't get why anybody would be named after those two. Over.
So first of all, Levi, even if we're following your Levi deserves it, because even though Yaakov gave it over the head to Shimon and Levi for their mistakes, Levi learned from his mistake. Right, which is ultimately he learned to channel his zealousness, and that's why eventually from the tribe of Levi we have all the priests and the Levites, etc., etc. Which is why later at the end of the Torah, when Moshe comes back and gives a blessing to all of them again, he includes Levi in the blessings. He does not include Shimon, and Shimon does, to a certain degree, not learn the lesson over the course of history. So your question is well considered in regards to Shimon. In regards to Levi ultimately, is very deserving because they heard their father's rebuke and took it to heart and changed. Why do we name our children Shimon, even though it seems to be that he didn't learn from his mistake? The answer is because the history is longer than just that, and ultimately the tribe of Shimon did learn, and were adopted in in many ways were at various points in history great saviors of the people, and so. And even then, we have to realize and recognize that when Yaakov is giving admonishment, we still consider all 12 very righteous. We hold people of very righteous level to a high standard, right? We know that Moshe was not allowed to enter into the land, whatever it is. We don't consider Moshe a failure, but we do say that there are things that there are certain expectations, and when you don't meet those expectations, there's going to be consequence. And so the case of Shimon, he was a very righteous, very, very holy person. In fact, we learn bar mitzvah from Shimon and Levi, from the fact that they were willing to take up for the cause of Dina when nobody else was. Except that he had a certain character trait that needed refining. His father did what a father should do, was not just mollycoddle his child and say, "Oh, perfect, it's great, it's great, it's great. Don't change anything." No, so there's something. I'm going to highlight the thing that you need to change, and unfortunately, Shimon, at least for a while, did not learn the lesson in changing this one particular foible, this one a particular character trait, but it did not make him evil or unworthy. He was still very, very, very righteous. Ultimately, did learn their lesson, and so is a name like all the rest of them names that stands in righteousness. And it would have, even if had Shimon not really learned his lesson, because he was righteous. Let's say instead of being 100% good, he was only 90%. Still a very good grade, as it were. Even though that we should not, any of us should not just when we know that we have the potential for 100, should we just be happy with a 90? No. And so that's why the Torah wasn't happy with his 90, or the Yaakov wasn't happy with his 90. He wanted to highlight and ask him to refine that last 10%, but it didn't mean that he wasn't a very, very, very righteous person. Today, we name, for some reason, it's a very, I don't have the answer regarding some other names. Like, for example, in Israel today, we name children Nimrod, or women are named Vashti, which is incredibly puzzling to me. But that's neither here nor there. All right, we got to run, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Good
And
Shabbos.
Shabbat
hopefully
shalom.
see everybody in Shul.